UFC 300 is shaping up to be an absolutely disappointing card for all UFC fans, especially me. I mean, when you think UFC 300, you think the biggest names. We think Ngannou versus Jones. We think McGregor versus Chandler. We think the biggest names in the sport, names that even casuals would really enjoy and want to see. UFC 300 is supposed to be this insanely hyped up card, one of the biggest cards that the UFC will ever have for the next couple years. It's actually insane that this is the card that we're getting, and I genuinely don't know if the UFC is going to have a main event to save this absolutely piece of shit card. This is supposed to be the biggest card for the next couple years, and we have fights like Holm versus Harrison, Andrade versus Rodriguez. Like, who gives a fuck about these fights? With all due respect to these fighters, when I think UFC 300, I definitely don't think Zhang Wei Li v Yan. I don't think that. I think the biggest names in the sport. I think names that even casuals would sit down and want to see, because it's actually a fucking major event card. It's supposed to be the biggest thing yet. And I cannot believe that this is the card that we're getting for UFC 300. I genuinely don't know what the matchmakers were thinking. I don't know why they're not listening to the fans. I don't know what is going through Dana White's head. Honestly, where is Nate Diaz? Why don't we have Nate Diaz at least fighting on this card? Why don't we have Mighty Mouse possibly back in the mix? Even that's a lot to ask for. We could get Usman, we could get Chimaev maybe back in the mix. We have a huge roster of multiple big fighters, yet this card is trash. Like, it's straight up trash. UFC 298 is way better than 300. I would swap out UFC 298 with UFC 300 at the rate it's going. I don't know what possible main event could literally save this card, because it's definitely not Leon versus Bilal. That fight is not main event worthy of a UFC 300, especially with the shit card underneath. I think that the only fight that could possibly save UFC 300 would have to be McGregor versus Chandler. McGregor is the only person that it would make sense. Then we have John Jones. That would also make sense. Any other huge name in the sport that people would actually want to see. But having McGregor on the card would be that ultimate W, and honestly would and might be able to save the entire card. Now, I know there's been some rumblings on Twitter between McGregor and Chandler. McGregor claiming UFC 300, let's seal the deal. He tweeted that, and Michael Chandler responded. With McGregor's track record, I genuinely don't know if I can believe anything this man says. Like, this man just continuously claims he's fighting. Last year, we've been waiting for him to fight in December last year. Never happened. We've been waiting for this USADA shit, for him to fight this year. June he's supposed to fight. It's not confirmed. According to Dana, it's not happening. So we can't believe Conor McGregor. I genuinely don't know if he's going to be able to make it the headline for UFC 300. And I don't believe Conor at this point. His track record just doesn't hold up. Then we have Oliveira versus Saruki. That's really one of the only fights that is going to be entertaining, that is going to be competitive. Yes, Justin Gaethje versus Max Holloway is a huge fight, and it's going to be an absolute dog war. We know this. We know it's going to be entertaining. But we also know that Justin Gaethje is 100% going to win that fight. Now, with all these other trash fights on UFC 300, I am 100% grateful to have Max v Gaethje. But I want fights that we don't know who's going to win. Fights that are going to be so close. Fights that are going to be so competitive. We are at the edge of our seat wondering who is going to win. With Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje, I think most fans would be able to acknowledge that Justin Gaethje is most likely going to win that. Like, that's an absolute fact. Cyril Gane versus Sergey Pavlovich is one of those fights that I would have loved to see on UFC 300. It's one of those fights that we genuinely don't know what would happen, and from the moment the fight starts, we would be engaged, wondering what's going to happen, not knowing who exactly is going to win. And that's the type of fights I was expecting for UFC 300. I mean, even Prohaska versus Rakic. Why couldn't we get Prohaska v Blachowicz? That's a fight that makes sense. That's a fight that hasn't happened yet. I don't know what these matchmakers are thinking or what goes through these matchmakers' head, honestly. Like UFC 298 has Volkanovski versus Topuria, Whittaker versus Costa, Ian Gary versus Neil Magny, Benny Cejudo versus Merab, and Hernandez v Coppola. That card is literally more exciting than UFC 300. Honestly, nobody gives a fuck about Andrade versus Rodriguez. I don't want to go too hard here, but even UFC 299 is better than UFC 300. Hell, I'm not gonna lie, half the cards of 2023 were better than UFC 300 is shaping up to be. So, if it ain't Conor, if it ain't Jones, if it ain't some big fight, I genuinely don't know. It's like, at that point, just name it like something else. Just don't even name it UFC 300, because it's honestly just disrespectful to the event and the actual concept of having a UFC 300. But anyways, that's the video. And if you have any other thoughts on this video or UFC 300, please leave a comment. I want to know what you guys think. I want to know, do the fans stand with what I'm saying? Are the fans hyped? Or is this turning out to be an absolute disappointment of a card?